everybody. Welcome to the Theologues Podcast. Today we have a very special show for you about the collision/dance of science and religion. But before we get into our topic, I'm going to plug our Audible sponsorship. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/theologues. Over 150,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. All right, guys. Well, we're going to have a special show today about, again, like I said, the collision/dance of science and religion. And I say dance because oftentimes there is a precarious tightrope walk involved. But today our guest is Mike McHargue, also known as Science Mike. He is the host of the Ask Science Mike podcast, as well as co-host of the Liturgists Podcast with Michael Gungor. Let's listen to a clip from the Liturgist where Mike talks about his conversion from atheism.
I don't get it. It's ridiculous. So I can't tell you I'm going to follow the 10 Commandments and just pick up the Gospels and be what I was.
Yeah.
I can't say that to you. But who is it good to talk to you again? I don't ever want to not talk to you again, and I never want to feel like we're apart from each other again. So let's make a deal. I will devote my life to serving you, whatever that means. I will do everything in my power to make life on this planet better. I will study the Bible again and see what remnants of you I can find in its pages. All I know is that tonight I met Jesus again. And when I said Jesus, here's the second crazy part of the story. I was standing kind of high up on the beach, and the Pacific rushed forward and soaked me up to mid-calf and washed all the sand off my shoes. And I was reminded of Rob saying Christ's final act of service was washing the feet of his followers. And I remember very clearly, very vividly saying, is this really happening?
Mike now uses his love and wonder with science to help explain some of the biggest questions that many people have today about the incongruity between science and religion. Welcome, Mike.
How's it going? Glad to be here.
Yeah, sounding loud and clear. We love it. Okay.
And I love that you call it a collision/dance because that's what happens every time I try to dance. I literally collide with another human being, so it's a perfect analogy.
I think we're kindred spirits there. I can't dance to save my life. So.
No way. I have chronic white guy disease. It's horrible.
Well, today I want to also introduce our panelists, and as you can hear laughing in the background, it's Arni Zachariasen. Hey, Arni.
Hello.
We're going to talk, we have some questions here rolling back and forth, but first, before we get into that, I just wanted to get to know you a little bit more, Mike. I want our audience to get to know you a little bit more. Some people may have heard you on, you Made It Weird with Pete Holmes, and, when you had Rob Bell on, and various, associations you have through the Liturgists. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got to be the origin story of Science Mike, so to speak?
Okay. I was at a party in Denver, Colorado. And I know some people say Colorado, but they're weird. I say Colorado. So I was in Denver and at a party with a couple of friends. One of those friends was Rob Bell.
Mm-hmm.
And Rob does this thing at parties sometimes where he has me ask or answer random science questions, or explain the science behind anything people can think of. So what happens scientifically when someone eats a chili dog, right? Like both good and bad.
Yeah.
And because I'm just a nerd, just a hardcore nerd, more often than not, I can give you some science behind pretty much anything.
Yeah.
And at that party was a guy who I didn't know before that, and his wife, and that was Michael and Lisa Gungor. And as the evening rolled on, Rob asked me to tell my story, which was not something I was doing publicly at that point, about becoming an atheist and returning to faith.
Yeah.
And that really resonated with Michael because he was in that story. He'd lost his faith and hadn't found it yet. So I told Michael these kind of axioms I'd come up with to help me believe again. And they helped him too. And we became friends. And some months later, he called me one day and said, what can we do in the space of science and faith that could help people like us know and experience God? And that's where the Liturgists came from. We started releasing these worship liturgies every month. Our first one was Vapor, and followed up immediately next month with Garden, which had Rob Bell and Rachel Holt Evans and Amina Brown, and just every month did another release. And it was a ton of work to do them monthly. So we decided to do something else, continue doing liturgies, but less often, and then launch a podcast.
Yeah.
And the podcast, we didn't know what would happen, but it really took off.
Yeah.
We actually crossed 100,000 subscribers just in the first few episodes. So
Yeah. Well,
we still don't know why that happened or why so many people listen to the show, but that's where it is. That's where the Liturgist came from.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I enjoy listening to both the Liturgist and your Science Mike podcast a lot. I often do it like when I'm on my way to work. And what you guys do really well, I think, is make people think. And that's something a lot of people really need these days, especially Christians. We just need to think more, right? So I was wondering also, like, is science something that you've always been interested in, or was this like something more immediate? Did it come out of your interest in when you became an atheist, or how did this like huge wealth of knowledge of science just start to grow in you?
I'm a nerd. Like legit a nerd. I taught myself to program computers when I was 7.
Oh, okay. Yep, you're a nerd.
And my career in technology started early. I made a network installation and consulting business in high school. And the engine behind computers is science. And so the first things that sort of like sparked me into the sciences were trying to figure out how computers worked and how I could build my own. And then looking at the narratives that captivated me, which were science fiction. I was a big Star Trek, later Star Wars fan. And I wanted to figure out how plausible those things were and how you could make those things actually exist. And that was science. Now, my science pedigree did hit kind of a second gear when I became an atheist, because I stopped trying to filter cosmology and quantum physics through a theistic framework, or even specifically like a young earth or even older theistic framework.
Yeah.
And I found I got much better at understanding and applying the sciences during my season of unbelief. And even now that I've sort of come back to faith, I don't try to squeeze science through the Christian toothpaste tube anymore.
Yeah.
I just let science be science and love it.
Okay. Yeah, see, for me, I feel like I love science, but I've never fully understood it. And for me, I'm more of a abstract thinker, somebody who is more into philosophy and is okay with entertaining ridiculous ideas and trying to bounce those around. What I'm wondering, for me is when I was faced with unbelief, a lot of it is I had to filter through philosophical questions. Were there any particular philosophical questions that you had to go through, in order to get to the point of where you were back into being a theist again? Or how did that work for you?
I mean, I'm not even sure if I'm a theist now. I'm a mystic.
Mystic, okay.
Theist might be too far the claim tree.
Okay.
Down the claim tree for me. But and I know a bunch of heads just skulls popping all through your listenership. So
they're fine.
We'll get to that. I didn't get any answers to my philosophical questions that before I encountered God. What made me open myself back up to God, to the church, to the Bible, and to the story of Christ was an experience. It wasn't any argument. And my sort of the way I became Science Mike was trying to contextualize and understand that experience. So I started to, do research into the brain and do research into, cosmology and physics and try to figure out how on earth could I stand on the beach and be resolute in my certainty that God was a logical impossibility and there was no evidence for God, and yet encounter that God directly.
Okay.
So, I'm a terrible student of philosophy. I study it. If I mess around in philosophy too much, I just drop right back to nihilism. Can't prove anything. Kind of solipsism, and then I say, well, that's a pretty lame way to exist, and so I kind of revert to a philosophical pragmatism.
Sure.
And from there, once you assume the universe exists and that people can know things, then science tends to demonstrate its tremendous power in revealing facts about the physical world over any other means of human knowledge.
So do you
could that have been a nerdier little aside? I don't know what the audience for your show is. I hope it's pretty nerdy.
Oh, they're nerdy. They're just
Okay,
they're like all over the map when it comes to nerddom. We're theology nerds, basically.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So that's the way that you put it, though. There makes me wonder. Do you think that science can someday prove God in some way?
I'm agnostic on whether God can be proven or not.
Okay.
Not even agnostic. Agnostic makes too many assumptions.
Sure, I know it is.
Because we have to say, what do you mean by God? Do you mean Einstein's God or Spinoza's God or the God of pantheists? Well, totally science can science doesn't prove anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Math has proofs, science does not. All science does as a methodology and as a way of understanding knowledge is it's a systematic way to approach empiricism.
Yeah.
And empiricism is just I put confidence in an idea that's proportional to the amount of evidence I have to support that idea.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So science doesn't prove anything. It just gives you increasing confidence in ideas.
Okay.
So in Einstein's God or Spinoza's God or the God of pantheism, science can give you very high confidence that God exists. If you're talking about the theistic personal God with will and agency that we know through the Abrahamic religions, science is going to have a lot harder time laying out a case of increasing confidence in those ideas. Sure. And it'll meet somewhere in the middle, for a deistic God, that there was some perhaps aware mover that initiated the universe. That's a much easier claim to make in the realm of empiricism than there's a God who loves us, cares for us, intervenes in reality, sent his son to the earth to be sacrificed and resurrected, for example. Those things get less and less scientific the further you go down that road.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Have you read anything by Keith Ward, Mike? Do you know who that is?
I don't know.
He's a pretty big philosopher, theologian in the UK. He wrote a book a couple of years ago called Pascal's Fire, and I was reminded of that book when you talked about standing on the beach, just being overwhelmed by this experience of God that goes against logic and philosophy. It was Pascal, that French philosopher back in the 17th century or whatever it was. He had, when he died, they found that he had sewn a little account of an experience that he had inside his jacket or something, where he said that he gave a date late at night, November 23rd, something or other. And he said from 10 p.m. to half past midnight, fire, the God of Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac, and not the God of the philosophers. just this, primal divine experience that couldn't be explained. He was one of the most clever philosophers ever to have lived, but it was not the God of the philosophers, it's the God of experience. And maybe you should check out that book.
It sounds fascinating, and it really, that description underscores kind of what modern neuroscientists tell us about how people know and experience God. I have a lot of empathy for skeptics and atheists, since I remain a skeptic and I was an atheist. So I tend to have a lot more openness to them and their ideas than most people in the church, and even see, frankly, tremendous value in the way that they question some of the rougher attributes of religions and religious experiences.
Yeah.
But one thing skeptics do poorly is they'll say that believers don't understand God very well, because they will say that if you ask a believer specifically who God is, it's difficult for them to articulate, which they take as meaning they don't have a sophisticated understanding. But what we have seen, well, I guess I was using we as humanity. That's a little confusing. What neuroscientists and researchers have seen when they brain scan people who have really close, intimate relationships with God is that the temporal lobe, the left temporal lobe, the language center of the brain, is not terribly involved in that. That God is not a system of ideas or philosophical framework, but that God neurologically is much more similar to an experience or an emotion or a hybrid of those two things. And anytime you have feelings or experiences, they create a brain state. And if you try to describe that brain state, your left temporal lobe activates, that's your language center, and it actually modifies the brain state in order to explain it. And permanently, by the way, alters it. The more you speak of God, almost the less you know God, neurologically speaking. So that's why I call myself a mystic and identify so much with Christian mysticism, is because these are people who, before modern science validated that, with brain scans, figured out that to truly know God is to experience God and to sit at the feet of the divine.
Yeah.
That's why I always thought that, or not always, but I tend to think that speaking in tongues is kind of the highest form of prayer. It's like you try to speak, but you have deactivated all the language centers in your brain. There's no actual linguistic or semantic content to what you're saying, but you just have to pray, though. And, your brain responds to God in the way that it can, in the most appropriate way, which is speaking, but without any words.
It's actually interesting. I've done some research in specifically speaking in tongues and what happens to the brain, and it's distinct from other forms of prayer and meditation. In any other type of prayer we know of, centering prayer, transcendental meditation, traditional cataphatic, just talking out loud prayer, mindfulness meditation, all those things have a characteristic signature of a focus in the prefrontal cortex, heightened activity there, and that will be usually attached to decreased activity in your parietal lobe, which is your sense of physical space and proximity. And then depending on whether you're doing Eastern or Western prayer, you'll either have activity in your left temporal lobe, the language center, or in your visual cortex. Eastern religions especially tend to have a focus on visualization for prayer. But when people, and in all those prayers, you see lowered activity in the limbic system, especially in the amygdala, which is the part of your brain that makes your most intense feelings and emotions. When people speak in tongues, oddly enough, as you've said, the language center of the brain goes quiet, but so does the prefrontal cortex, that part of our brain that makes attention and willpower and focus and concentration. That kind of goes away. And the limbic system lights up, and effectively the lower parts of the brain engage your motor functions, including your voice box and your vocal cords and all that, to make sounds that aren't language, nor are they the focus of intent. There's no agency involved. Your prefrontal cortex, your decision maker, is not doing it. And that's why speaking in tongues is such an otherworldly experience, because it's coming from a part of your brain you don't typically associate with decisions or will. And so to that observer, let's forget about the existence of God and any mystical component for a second. Neurologically speaking, someone actually speaking in tongues experiences words coming from something other than themselves.
That's kind of mind-blowing.
You need to become a charismatic again, Zach.
Yeah, about that. No, I'm just kidding.
I've never been able to do it. I've never spoken in tongues.
No, me neither, man.
I grew up Southern Baptist. That was not a thing we did.
Yeah.
And now that I'm a mystical Methodist, that's not really a thing they do either.
Yeah.
But it's still fascinating research.
Yeah. I kind of lean towards the Eastern Orthodox Christian, way of meditation and prayer and all of that stuff. And I think there's a certain discipline there that they actually kind of borrowed from, or I shouldn't say borrowed, but it was all kind of naturally ingrained in the Eastern Orthodox tradition of prayer that came from just the whole Eastern meditative prayer side. And so, like in hesychasm, which is a form that formulated in the East of prayer and silent contemplative type of prayer, and it's actually you just repeat Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner, over and over and over again, and you start to exercise certain parts of your brain differently. And I guess that I was kind of trying to segue in here to that neuroplasticity part of this question. Arni previously has written about neuroplasticity for Theologues, and I think the teachings of Christ make a great entry point into talking about how our thoughts and the power of our thoughts can elevate us, in a sense, in our humanity on a different level. Like they are existentially. Christ in his teachings in some ways knew something that neurologists are just starting to grasp as we've done more research, that our thoughts do matter about how we control our lives and where we tend to train ourselves into a more, I don't know what the word is, a more peaceful existence, in a sense. And I've studied a little bit on that, but I haven't really touched on that a whole lot. And I know that you have talked about that before on your show. But if you want to talk about a little bit about that or other bridge points between science and Christianity, where you specifically see teachings of Christ linking to science, do you have any insights on that?
Man, that's yes.
That's a big question. I'm sorry.
That's a big question.
I dropped that as a bomb. Sorry.
Could you explain your life's work?
Or at least a small little sliver of a piece of your life's work, if you could.
Okay, so first of all, neuroplasticity is the ability of our brains to adapt to different circumstances and even injury. So if you have a brain injury and part of your brain is damaged, your brain can work to route those functions to other parts of the brain,
right,
and mitigate that loss of function. And that's kind of the plastic idea of the brain. Now, in terms of language, the language we use having power, that's absolutely true. And recently was demonstrated in profound depth on the internet when everyone fought about what color the dress was.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, I made a video about that the night it happened, only because my phone was exploding with people asking me to explain the science of what was happening. How is this possible? And I've even found some better stuff since then. For example, we've kind of looked back and historically, the color blue is a new phenomenon in human history. When you go back and look at writings from antiquity, the sky was not described as blue, and neither was the sea, which seems ridiculous, but it seems perhaps that earlier people did not see the color blue because they had no name for it.
Yeah, I think I heard something like that on Radiolab, or they were talking about this concept.
Well, hopefully, I haven't heard that, so hopefully I'm not about to just repeat a bunch of Radiolab stuff.
No, it's cool.
Our
listeners don't listen to Radiolab. Don't worry about it.
Like, I have to be careful because lots of our listeners listen to Radiolab. Anyway, so they found a tribe today that still doesn't have a name for the color blue. And so they did an experiment where they showed them this clock face, basically, of squares. And there were 11 green squares and 1 blue square. And they said, which one is different? And they couldn't see any square as different than the other ones. They had no word for blue, so they didn't see it.
Yeah.
Now, if you take that same experiment and do it in the West, but you take 11 squares that are green and a 12th square that's a slightly different shade of green, most Westerners can't pick out the square. But since this tribe had over 60 words for the color green, they could all pick out the square. Because their cognition, we have this feeling that our senses are feeding us information and then we're processing it, and that's not true.
Yeah.
The words we use affect the way that we discern reality, the way that we view ourselves, the way that we interpret the outcome of any action or any result. All these things are dramatically tied to our language. So, when Jesus says, love God with everything you've got and love your neighbor as yourself, he's now made a claim we can measure through science.
Mm-hmm.
And if you adopt that attitude of loving a God who loves you and loving your neighbors, that actually has a measurable impact on the brain, and it's beneficial. People who do that have lower stress, lower blood pressure, improved focus, improved concentration, better memory. They neurologically have an increased capacity to be empathetic and compassionate, and they have a reduced propensity to be angry for any given situation. Those are all measurable effects of adopting that teaching of Christ. And so time and time again in the scriptures, we see Christ offering moral teachings that are demonstrably beneficial not only to individuals, but to their group, and ultimately, because of the degree to which Christ encourages nonviolence and encourages radical acceptance of others, an ability to sort of transcend humanity's bent towards tribalism.
Yeah. I don't know how to express it, but that's kind of like where I come in when it comes to Jesus's teachings. I think a lot of humanity and our existence as humans, like the fullest potential we could reach in humanity, can be found through the gospel. That's where I start to go that way. But I guess the entry point between that and science, I always had a hard time because, again, like, I'm more of an abstract thinker. So to me, everything is framed in these big, giant philosophical questions. And I like that what you do on science, Mike, is you take each piece of each question and you deconstruct it, and then you kind of put it back together a little bit, but with some Christian context in there,
Yeah, and the whole point of the show is my answers almost don't matter on Ask Science Mike. What matters is that someone got to ask a question they don't usually get to ask, and nothing bad happened.
Yeah.
And so part of what I try to do is de-shamify and de-fearify Christianity. Instead of being afraid of new ideas, afraid of differences of opinion, emphasize the fact that the point of this movement is to follow one particular person, Jesus Christ, and to model our lives after Jesus, and not necessarily to, figure out who's in and who's out, or big build walls,
Yeah.
or you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
to really say this is a way for us to include more people, not less.
Right. And there are many Christian groups that for a long time haven't really had any friction between science and religion. It just seems like a more of a evangelical kind of phenomenon. And, you know, where you have the battles between creationists and evolutionists and stuff. And Catholics, they've for a long time accepted evolution as and even the Big Bang theory. Wasn't it a Catholic priest who came up with the Big Bang theory?
George Lamothe was his name.
Yeah. Do you think that this is something that's going down in Christian culture, especially in the evangelical community, or do you think it's always going to be a friction, a tension that's always going to be there?
Well, I mean, there's the potential for conflict with science with any faith.
Right.
Because science says, look at the evidence first, period. So, for example, saying that Jesus rose from the dead is a bad claim scientifically.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, that's a bad science claim. So some of that conflict is probably inevitable. I think the trick is learning to walk in the tension of letting science inform us about important things about reality, while also understanding that our faith can be a profound source of meaning, and for some context to all those facts that we get from science.
Yeah.
That said, you know, the different belief systems, they, you know, if divine revelation is a critical part of how you get facts about physical reality, or if it's important to your faith that the scriptures are literal and infallible, then some conflict is inevitable. Part of that has to do with the, you know, social psychodynamic models that birth those religious philosophies. You know, the evangelical mindset, although it really only kind of hit the stage, you know, 150, 160 years ago in America, harkens back to a way of viewing reality and viewing sacred scriptures that is quite ancient and pre-Enlightenment. And so, you know, anytime fundamentalist movements happen in any religion, they tend to counter empiricism or post-Enlightenment philosophies. Once again, that was a very nerdy answer.
It's okay. It's okay. Now let me ask you this. This is a question I've kind of been burning to ask you. Is there any, like, if science were to disprove something about your beliefs, your religious beliefs in any way, would it shake you? Like, is there any particular piece of those religious beliefs that if science somehow were to prove it false?
Well, again, science doesn't prove anything.
That's
or
true.
disprove
You
anything.
did
It
say
merely
that.
increases or decreases the confidence you have in belief.
Okay.
Based on, but so a science could say, you know, it's very, 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 very unlikely that a basketball is going to appear in my office in the next 10 seconds, right?
Yeah.
Or, you know, it could say, you can just safely assume the Earth is not flat. You can really safely assume that the Earth does orbit the sun. So I'm trying to think of what in my faith I could lose confidence in so much that would affect me. Because the thing is, I am a skeptic. I am preemptively skeptical. It's difficult for a skeptic to hit me with some question I don't already hit myself with.
Yeah. Well, like, I don't know. Like, I think of, and I don't know if this necessarily relates to science. Maybe it would relate more to empiricism, period, or reality, as you look at reality. But say for example that somebody did find the skeletal remains of Jesus Christ, and somehow, maybe through genetic testing or through some sort of testing, they found out that it was Jesus Christ and that his body actually did not resurrect, or it was just disappeared. It was taken and stolen somewhere else. If there is no resurrection, I would say, for me anyway, that would be something that would shake my belief to the core. That would make me basically abandon Christianity in a sense.
I
But
think
don't
most
know.
Christians would agree if without the resurrection, there's not much to their faith. I'm probably not one of those.
Yeah.
I'm probably the rare exception. And I realize, like, Pauline philosophers right now, they're going, what do you mean? That Paul says it.
Like him, man.
But it's like, again, my whole gig, the Bible was written by people. Paul was a very smart guy,
Mhm.
but I don't hold Paul as like the end-all be-all voice of God.
Sure.
So he's just a guy who wrote a lot of really important works for the church really early on.
Mhm.
So, you know what I mean? So the fact that Paul says our faith is rubbish if there was no resurrection, I don't know if I agree with that.
Yeah.
And I'm part of my gig is saying things that other people are afraid to say.
No, that's fine. I mean, that's,
And so,
Yeah.
if they found, how on earth that would be such a huge project to even
sure.
associate some bones with any figure in history. Like if someone said, we found the bones of Julius Caesar, there would be a mountain of evidence required to support a claim like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But to me, we talk about Jesus all the time. And this is something I recently heard Richard Rohr talk about, almost to the point we make an idol out of the person of Jesus and forget about the Christ.
Mhm.
This part of the Trinity that was there at creation and that reconciles God to man. And I don't know that, for me, theologically, it's impossible to contemplate the fact that the Christ could still be active in reconciling the world to man, even if the person, Jesus, who incarnated the Christ, did actually die.
Okay.
Do you see what I mean? So, like, already part of the way I view the scriptures is there's a real possibility that a lot of these really core creedal ideas in Christianity are mythicized accounts of what actually happened. That's already integrated into my belief system.
Yeah.
So for now, I'm comfortable trusting those creedal ideas because I'm in the church and I'm part of the church community. I said the creeds to join the Methodist Church, and I meant them, but I also hold them with an open hand, in that to do good scholarship, you have to understand that a lot of these works, they don't appear to have been written by the people that the church says they are written by. They appear to have possibly been written later. And instead of like staking my fact claims so far from scholarship that I'm just waiting for a book to come along and wreck my faith, I'm already thinking about and wrestling with those ideas, even as I follow Jesus. And I think that is well modeled in the Gospels. Because when you look in the Gospels, when Jesus was here, he calls these people, and they don't really know anything about him. They certainly don't know about a crucifixion. They don't know about a resurrection. They don't know about either penal substitutionary atonement theory or Christus Victor. They just know they believe this teacher is onto something, and they follow.
Yeah.
And as they start to follow, they get it wrong all the time. Jesus has to constantly correct them,
Mhm.
and then Jesus dies, and they scatter into the wind,
Yeah.
right? And then Jesus comes back, and what does he have to do? He's got to keep teaching them and keep correcting them. And then Jesus ascends into heaven, and then what happens? The epistles record the church trying to figure out what happened and what to do about it. So we have this modernist idea, this Enlightenment idea, that the most important thing about our faith is what we believe, and that we believe the right things, and that is important. Trying to get better beliefs about God is important because, as we've talked about, our language, our cognition matters in what we do.
Mhm.
But I think modeled in the Gospels, the most important thing about our faith is following, is actually walking the road behind Jesus Christ and trying to live as he lived. And to me, get ready for angry emails, that's even more important than the resurrection.
What is your email, Mike?
Yeah,
go to
we'll give it to you.
MikeMcHargue.com/contact and send me as many
We'll forward
paragraphs
them
as
all
you'd
to
like.
you. Well, Mike, that articulation, I don't know if I entirely agree with it myself in my personal beliefs, but I really appreciate you laying it out there like that, because I think we need to have those kind of discussions completely around each other, and we need to listen and not just talk over one another.
Yeah, it's really important to note, I don't think I'm like a prophet. That's just my opinion.
Sure. That's all we really can go on ourselves, like our opinions about these things. We that's why we dialogue. That's why we have Theologues, is so we can have these sorts of dialogues with one another. What I would like to do now is I'm gonna divert to Arni. If you have any other further questions, Arni, and then we're gonna do like our mid-roll, and then we will go back into one more question, and then we'll do recommendations. Sound good?
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, sounds good to me, Zach. I was thinking while you were talking about, or we were talking about the language, how language sort of makes possible our understanding of the world in sort of a really basic way. How do you think that sort of applies to the difference between believers and atheists? Do you ever think, like, when you talk to atheists, you guys are like that tribe? I mean, you simply don't have a word for blue, and that's why you can't see blue. And the difference in a really fundamental way between believers and atheists or non-believers is this kind of language and how it makes possible a certain seeing of the world for one group, and simply that is simply inconceivable for another.
Well, I think the first thing you want to note is that atheists are just as much, if not more, of an amorphous blob than any other group of humans. They have maybe even less consistency in their belief and ideas than Christians. And when I say Christians, I mean include all 40,000 denominations. So, the kind of anti-theists or new atheists, the kind of evangelical atheists of the world, their God, the God they don't believe in, is very similar to the God fundamentalists do believe in, a set of beliefs and fact claims. And so those atheists think that those beliefs and fact claims are not only wrong, but damaging to humanity. And then fundamentalists think that they're absolutely true and unquestionable. And so those guys have a party fighting each other on the internet. And then you have Christians whose idea about God, they still have specific creeds or beliefs about God, but those are merely a cognitive container for something much bigger, much more expansive, and much more beautiful. And when atheists talk to those Christians, or at least the atheists I just talked about, the new atheists, they think that's a bunch of mumbo jumbo gobbledygook, and I'd rather talk to a fundamentalist because at least they make sense.
Yeah.
And in that context, absolutely, I think what you're looking at is they don't have a word for the color blue. But then other atheists, Sam Harris is a great example, actually do know what we're talking about in those experiences, because Sam Harris seeks those experiences through non-religious spiritual practice. And so he's got a word for the color blue. It's just not God.
Yeah.
And so what I found, if you can have a conversation with those sorts of atheists, you can actually find tremendous common ground. And if you make a case that the way you practice your faith is not anti-science and beneficial for the species, a lot of times you'll find that person soften on their stance on religion. And so what's important to me is to empathize with whoever I'm talking to and the way that they understand these situations. There's not a lot I can say to a religious fundamentalist other than that I love them, and that I think their walk to try to make the world better, serving Christ, is beautiful. I can actually say a little bit more to an anti-theist or a new atheist because at least we have a common respect for the sciences. And maybe I can just demonstrate to them through my actions that it's possible to be a person of God and not be just a total ass about it. And then that creates progress. For a person like me who's got a more open, expansive idea about God, even if we disagree about specifics, and I would think on this call, the three of us disagree about specifics, but we all agree that God is working in the world and doing something wonderful. And then in that last group, the atheists who just say, there is something to this, but it's not called God, I meet them where they're at. I say, I just think it's great that you're finding a way to peace and happiness. And I'd love to learn from you in that process. And what happens most in my experience is then they also want to learn about your journey as well.
Yeah. We need to continue to dialogue across with unbelievers, and even within believers, we need to continue that. But, they're like you're kind of alluding to, there's a certain point you can't do anything else. You just need to love each other, basically. We need to continue to do that. So, okay, so I want to go ahead and plug our Audible sponsorship one more time here. For you, the listeners of the Theologues Podcast, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. And this week, we'd like to recommend The Language of God by Francis S. Collins. He talks a lot about the genetic components and like how his own testimony as somebody who is a Christian but also is deep in the sciences. So it's a great read. I read it. I haven't listened to it, but I'm sure it's also great to listen to. So to download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/theologue. Again, that's audibletrial.com/theologues for that free audiobook. And kind of to segue from that, Francis S. Collins believes in evolution as a Christian. He believes the facts of evolution, and personally, I do too. I'm actually probably coming out to many people right now by saying this, but I believe that evolution is a fact. And in terms of certainty on that fact, like you said about science, science doesn't prove anything, and so I don't think that evolution is necessarily proven, but I believe that the mounting evidence for it is overwhelming. So I'd like to have a little bit of a dialogue here about creationism and evolution. First off, this has probably been beaten to death, so we're not going to get into huge things. But I think the main issue that a lot of Christians have about evolution, and this is probably something that you're not as hung up on as I am, Mike, but how
I don't get hung up on much.
I kind of got that. How original sin works in evolution, how sin came to be through evolution, because the Genesis story gives us this narrative of how sin came into the world, and a lot of people think that if you don't have that there, then the whole process of us going from being some animal to human negates that whole entrance of sin. Like anything we do doesn't necessarily mean it's a sin, it's just more a product of our animal nature. Have you thought about that at all? Like how these things all work together, like how evil, sin, and everything works within that framework outside of the literal Genesis narrative?
Yeah, you could say I've thought about that a little bit. Sure. I've had that question come in to Ask Science Mike probably 300 times.
Okay, well then, yeah.
And I think I actually am answering it. I just answered it. It's either that episode's out or about to come out. I don't know.
Okay. So we don't even need to talk about it. Just go listen to Science Mike.
No, I'm not plugging the show. We'll do it right here. So first of all, original sin is not an original idea in the church. Like
right.
you can look back archaeologically and historically and figure out when that doctrine emerged. And it's a few hundred years after Christ. And this is what's funny to me about why it's so important to us. Like, can we prove original sin? Probably not. Can we prove sin's happening right now?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty easy. Like, I think, when's the last time I told a lie? It's what, 2 minutes? I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, we look at our own life, and I don't need original sin. My life has sin in it.
Yeah.
My life, I do things I know I shouldn't do because I want to, right? Like, in really simple ways. I am a father. I have 2 beautiful girls. I'm a husband. I'm the only source of income in my family. And, man, I eat pizza all the time. And I know eating pizza is terrible for me and shortening my lifespan and potentially, cutting decades off my life. And I still go, you know what? I could really go for a slice of pepperoni about now. And I eat it anyway. And that's a really trivial example, but I call it out on purpose because if you get any more serious, it starts to hit people too hard because you'll say something in their experience that they are wrestling with.
Yeah.
Those things absolutely appear to come from an interplay between our lower and higher brain functions. Yeah. When food was more scarce, it was advantageous to eat as much fat, as much carbohydrate, and as much protein as you could. Those are energy-dense forms of food that were hard to find in the natural environment. And today, in an age of agriculture and industrialization, it's too easy to get calories. So what? When Genesis speaks of sin, it is talking about something real, regardless of how mythic or unmythic those passages are.
Right.
Anyone who reads a story about standing in front of a tree and being tempted by a serpent is immediately going to identify with that story. How often do we desire something that we know we don't need, and yet the serpent whispers in our ear? So scientifically, we have a lot of explanation for those things. In an evolutionary model, a theistic evolutionary model, the means by which God created humans out of the dust is 2 processes. One, abiogenesis, the means by which simple molecules become complex molecules, become life. And once you have life, evolution via natural selection, over a period of many billions of years, produced humans. Once humans emerged, they are and were distinct from all other animals in the fact that we can contemplate ethical considerations, that we can ponder our actions in the past, and we can rehearse possible actions in the future in our minds without moving. That creates an entirely different standard for ethics and behavior than any other animal on the planet.
Yes.
And so when Genesis speaks of us being made in God's image, that talks about something, again, that is scientifically verifiable. Could it be possible we invest too much energy sometimes in wrestling with whether exactly what original sin means in antiquity and not enough time wrestling with what it means today?
Yeah.
And what it means to this afternoon and tomorrow. And what these, this ancient Hebrew idea of shalom, God's perfect peace, and our call to increase and not decrease shalom, that's an incredible idea that gets trampled underfoot when we just try to figure out, well, I didn't come from monkeys or I did, which of course I picked that example because it's ridiculous. We didn't come from monkeys in evolution. But to me, it's such a waste of our energies to fight about that when we could look at this text. But I still read Genesis regularly, and every time I do, I'm offered some new insight about how to live. And I also connect, and it's so beautiful to know that for thousands of years, people have been wrestling with and trying to understand and serve the same God that I do. And so I don't care if you're young Earth, old Earth, theistic evolutionists, whatever. I think we can all agree as Christians that the Bible is a source of beauty and truth and inspiration.
Wow. Well, Mike, I hope you didn't just drop your mic on the floor, because it's probably a really expensive mic. But if you had one, I bet you could have dropped the mic on the floor at that point. Like a spare one, just a cheap one.
I should keep just an extra mic just to drop. Yeah,
exactly. Just like put it right over
Do
here.
you have a science mic there somewhere? No.
Oh.
That was
I was at a
terrible.
conference this week, and I got done writing something. And when I write something that I'm really happy with, I drop my pen like it's a mic. And someone actually laughed at the table. They're like, "Did you just drop your pen like a mic?" And I was like, "Yeah, I was really happy with what I wrote."
I write on my computer, and if I were to do that, I probably would have to take my computer in way too often. So.
Oh, that'd be a bad scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was awesome. Just really, that was. Let's go into recommendations now. For those of you who aren't aware, we do kind of just one recommendation at the end of the show. Something, it could be, anything from a book, a movie, a TV show, or whatever the heck. It could be, chapstick you love. I don't know. At the end of this show. And I'm going to go ahead and start with Arni, because I think that Arni might have something good. And I'm still also thinking of something myself. So, go ahead.
Well, it's strange because I was going to recommend the chapstick. No. I want to recommend something that is not very easy to acquire, something I experienced last week, which is a total solar eclipse.
Oh, yeah.
As some of you might know, that happened here in the Faroe Islands. Only other place on Earth that happened at the same time was Svalbard, that little country way up north in the Arctic.
Mm-hmm.
And it was amazing. My wife and my kids, we went to a little drive. We were in nature. The ocean was there, the mountains, and the sun was becoming smaller and smaller, and it was really cloudy. So we weren't sure if we were going to see anything really exciting. And we could catch glimpses of the sun through the clouds, holes in the clouds. And I was kind of resigned of, okay, this is cool, but I'm not going to see the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
But that's okay because, but when it happened, the clouds parted, and it was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I was just standing there gobsmacked. Just, this is the coolest thing. This is amazing. And just that sense of being on a planet that you sometimes forget just how small you are, and also just how small the solar system is. Oh, that's the moon. It's coming between me and the sun at the moment, and this universe is huge, and I'm really small, and I'm really thankful for the whole thing, and it's amazing. Yeah. So if you ever get the chance to experience that, do jump at that chance.
Yeah.
So total solar eclipse for me.
Was that only in your hemisphere that was happening?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's going to happen in the States in like 2 years or something.
Yeah. I always tend to miss them because for some reason I forget that there's supposed to be an eclipse that day or something. I don't know.
Yeah. The whole week was just an astronomical sort of circus. We had northern lights like every night. There was a supermoon before, the night before, the morning of, and just all sorts of weird stuff happening. So it was amazing.
I'm gonna come visit you someday and experience that for myself.
The next time is in 250 years. So.
Oh, okay.
If we both cryogenically freeze, then maybe we could hook up in 2.5 centuries.
Yep. Get on that, Mike.
Yeah.
On it.
Do you have anything you want to recommend, Mike?
Well, we've talked a lot about God and the brain, so my go-to book on that topic is called How God Changes Your Brain by Andrew Newberg, MD. He is a neuroscientist who brain scanned a bunch of people of faith and drew conclusions from that. It is easily one of the most powerful books about faith that I've ever read.
Yeah.
He's a good guy, Newberg. Written lots of stuff.
Okay. I want to recommend another podcast. that kind of stemmed off of Radiolab, because we talked about that a little bit before the show, called Invisibilia. Again, another podcast talking about crazy stuff going on in your brain. But they put on some really great episodes lately. I think they've only done for this season 6 or 8, something like that. And they talked about different stories. Like there was this one about a guy who, I guess from a very young age, was struck with this kind of disease or something where he basically was a vegetable, and his parents like thought that they had resigned themselves to basically taking care of him for the rest of his life as a vegetable, like laying in bed, like brain dead almost. And actually he was fully awake. His brain was fully active. His body just couldn't move. And so everything around him, like he knew what was going on, and it was like he was trapped in his own body. And after a while, inch by inch, centimeter by centimeter, he pushed himself out of that. And he now, he's not walking or anything, but he actually is in a wheelchair, can operate a wheelchair, has a girlfriend or a wife or something like that. And it's just an incredible story. So Invisibilia.
I thought you said he had a girlfriend and a wife. And I was like, wow, that's an aggressive return.
No, well, yeah, he's got game too. So, no, yeah. So
he's probably got rims, That's probably what does it.
Yeah, through NPR, I think is where that comes from. So, Mike, thank you very, very much for coming on. We appreciate it having you on today. This has been a great talk.
Yeah, my pleasure. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Where can people check you out if they want to get a hold of you and stuff? I already mentioned the Science Mike podcast and your website. Can you give people your website name?
Sure. It's MikeMcHargue.com, which none of you can spell. So that's a Mike, M-C-H, argue, like you're going to argue with somebody, MikeMcHargue.com. Or if you don't like spelling impossible last names, just go to AskScienceMike.com. That'll actually take you to my website. And then if you just click on the tab that says work, it'll give you an overview of everything I'm a part of.
Great. Arni, where can people find you if they want to talk to you on the internet?
I think Twitter is probably a good place, which my handle is Arni Zach, ARNIZACH.
Okay. And I am at Part of a Plan on Twitter, and you can also reach me at partofaplan@gmail.com. I'm already inundated with spam, so I don't care if you contact me. And you can also contact us through Theologues. There's a contact button on theologues.com. If you have emails or comments about the show, we actually do want to hear those, even the angry ones. It's okay. We can handle it. And you can find also great articles on theologues.com. Right, Arni?
Yes. Maybe people will be interested in one that I wrote a couple months ago called Why Christianity is Fundamentally Committed
to Science.
Nice.
Yep, it's a good one. And we are putting out some really good theological articles if you're, trying to explore your faith and anything like that. So anyway, we thank you guys for listening to this podcast. If you can, we would really, really appreciate it if you just spent some time on iTunes, like 30 seconds or so, and give us a review, because that helps us go higher in the rankings and maybe catch up with Science Mike's podcast. And thank you guys for listening. I'd also like to say one final thank you to Mike Harvett and the Flight Metaphor for the music for the show. The song is The Fight off of their new album. Thank you guys, and God bless.
Boom.
That was a great one.
I fought it all for as long as I could, and all this time I told myself I'd be good, but I'm so tired